Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. So we're continuing the conversation, of course, as we prepare for today's budget reading. And joining us, we have the CEO of AMCHAM, Nirad Tewari, to weigh in. Good morning and welcome.
Morning, Natasha. Good morning to Rokas and everyone in studio and, of course, looking on and listening on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My
I know
pleasure.
It's quite early, but we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And, of course, you and your team, you've been working so hard to ensure that we have these recommendations in place and a proper analysis of what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago and the economic side of it. Now, in light of that, can you summarize some of the key economic challenges you've seen Trinidad and Tobago face for 2024?
Sure. I mean, it would be a rehash of everything that everyone has said, right? So, so revenue continues to be a challenge because of both production and prices. There seem to be some continuing headwinds that would affect oversupply. So oil and gas prices are likely to be depressed, at least in the short term, from what we see. And of course, production is not going to increase significantly. When that happens, that also affects petrochemical production. And even if prices of petrochemicals go up, if we're not producing as much as we could, there will be an impact on revenue. Of course, if there's a super cycle of some kind, that can be ameliorated somewhat. So revenue is going to be a challenge, and therefore the government will have less to spend, I'm sure, than they want, and to allocate that money into the areas that they want with high levels of recurrent expenditure. And that's part of our problem, right? So it's like any household. So if you know you have a mortgage, you have, for some reason, you have commitments to if you employ people, your light bill, your water, or even more so, like if you employ other people and what have you, your discretionary income is reduced by all of those things because you have to pay a mortgage or your rent, you have to pay a light bill, you have to pay water, you have to pay internet. Nobody wants to be without internet. And so on and so forth. So each one of those reduces the amount you have that you can decide to spend on linemen, on birthdays, on whatever else, right? And so that's part of what is happening at a time where our infrastructure in the country does need upgrading, and we are more and more dealing with the vagaries of climate change, whether that means that we need to find new wells and new sources of water because we're not in a good position despite being in the rainy season with regards to our water in the reservoirs, or if it means prevention and mitigation of flooding, the road infrastructure and bridges and so on and so forth. What do we do with our schools? How do we make them more future ready? And those kinds of things. So the discretionary income is less, and therefore we have to borrow. And if we have to borrow, our debt service amount increases as well. So we are paying a lot right now in debt servicing. And so those are some of the challenges. And above all of that is crime. Unless we deal with crime, we are not going to positively impact confidence. And crime is not just about money. It's about a plan, it's about metrics, and it's about delivering on those metrics. Right? So if we say we're going to, and it gives nobody comfort to hear that housebreaking and larceny statistics are down when the murders, the brazenness of the murders, where they are occurring, the frequency of murders is rising, and people do not feel as though, because there is the actual reality of crime and then there's the perception of crime. And both go hand in hand, right? And so people do not feel as though crime is down. I was passing, just to come in here, I saw a store on Tragreed Road had been broken into, right? I saw the police there by the burglar proof. And that is what citizens are experiencing and feeling all of the time. So it's unfortunate when it happens to a minister. It's unfortunate when it happens to anybody. And we need to deal with crime. We're a small society. If we want to stimulate the confidence that will allow for the investment, for diversification, for the creation of jobs, and so on and so forth.
I want to jump back to one of the things you mentioned. Of course, we know crime is a major, major factor, right? I want to jump back to the recurrent expenditures that you mentioned before. Is there a way then that we should be looking at reducing that recurrent expenditure cost?
It's a tough one, right? Especially in an election year, because recurrent expenditures, the big one is salaries, right? And the government is the largest employer in the country. The second one, of course, is transfers and subsidies. Now transfers and subsidies include things like transfers to state enterprises. So people think it's just direct cash handouts. It's handouts. It's not. It's a little more than that, right? And to deal with those things, you cannot deal with them from our perspective at AMCHAM simply in a sort of using an arithmetic approach, right? You can't just say that the wage bill is X and we want to make it X minus whatever percentage, because there's finance and economics on paper, and then there's a reality when it comes to people. And a government is supposed to run a society, a country, a municipality, whatever is their remit. For the benefit of the people. So we have to start with the outcomes that we want, and how do we get to those outcomes. So if we're spending $6 billion on health, or I think it's a little more, what are the outcomes we want, and how can we look at the efficiency along that? It may not be headcount reductions, right. It may be improvements on procurement. It may be process mapping and management a little more effectively, right? So there's no easy answer, and we are not going to come here and say, well, you need to reduce. I know as a journalist, you might be looking for some things that would be a little headline grabbing.
No, I genuinely want to know, because if you say that the recurrent expenditure is one of the biggest costs that we have.
It is. So transfers and subsidies, there are ways that we can look at those. For example, you can have graduated, you can reduce those in a graduated manner, meaning those who need it most benefit from it, and those who don't, who actually use more of it. So for example, I probably use more electricity than many other people. Should I be benefiting from the lower electricity price and therefore the subsidy? I would be benefiting more than somebody who's using less kilowatts, for example, right? So you can graduate it in the same way you have a tax credit for people earning a certain amount, right? And then after that you pay income tax. You can do the same thing with subsidies. So there are many ways that you could do it, but what it takes is collaboration. What does not work is when a government, any government, comes and says, bam, 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 this is what we're doing.
Right.
There's an impact on people and businesses, and there's no discussion on okay, what is your policy intent, and how can we best get to that policy intent with the least amount of pain? There will be pain. There will always be pain with change. But it doesn't have to be the most amount of pain. Right?
So
in light of slight pain.
It could be.
Yeah, well, but so in light
managed.
of that, how can the private sector collaborate with the government to stimulate economic growth?
Well, the key word there is collaborate. There has to be more discussion. We've been saying this for a long time. There has to be more discussion with the private sector. And as I said, when the government comes and says, this is our goal. Okay, so a good example, I think, is the Adopt a School program. The Ministry of Education developed an Adopt a School program that has a tax credit. They worked with the Ministry of Finance, and there was a tax credit. The minister had a nice, simple, but useful symposium, invited the private sector, invited the Ministry of Finance, invited, well, of course, Ministry of Education officials, explain the thing, and it's rolling out. Now, I don't know yet how successful, we don't know yet how successful it is, but I suspect that is a program that would be quite successful, because one, they made it simple, two, they explained it, 3, there's an attempt to collaborate and engage. And there are other things in government, right? But we need more of that on the big issues and the hard issues so that we can get to the outcomes that we want. Because we're all in this together. The private sector wants whoever's in government to succeed, because that means that the business environment is better. You can do more business, you can make more profits, you can employ more people, the government will get more taxes, and therefore the whole society is better. Nobody wants a government to fail, right? Nobody wants a government to not perform as well as it could, because it doesn't benefit anyone really in the immediate term, but certainly not in the long run.
At least nobody doing legitimate business.
Nobody doing legitimate business, correct.
All right,
I'm only here representing
legitimate business. Well, that's why I make sure that we clarify that, right?
Right.
In terms of the digital transformation, we live in 2024. You mentioned nobody wants to be without internet. What role do you see that ministry playing when it comes to helping us to move forward?
The Ministry of Digital Transformation is playing a really important role, right? So they have already identified a number of key issues, many of which we have also recommended. So we're completely in sync from a policy perspective in terms of what some of the big things need to do. A national EID, and we could talk more about that if you want, an open data policy, which includes an interoperability framework for data, so that the data sets in different ministries and government entities are not in different formats, so you really can't bring them together and use them and analyze them and so on. So those are some of the things that they're working on. We would like things to move faster. And we think that if they do, there would be more value for citizens, more benefit for citizens, and of course, businesses as well, right? But they're also playing a role, say, with entities such as the TTIFC, to find some of the low-hanging fruit and try to implement some of those solutions. Some of them require legislation, some of them require, culture change. The biggest part of digital transformation is change management and getting people to buy in and adopt them, right? But one of the things that we sometimes find holds us back is we play to those who are least able, when we should be doing the opposite. We should implement the solution and then provide support for those who are least able to use it. So if we're saying older people, for example, aren't really akura with the technology and maybe would be in a situation where they would be disadvantaged, we have a way to support them, but we don't stop the whole thing for 5% of the population or what have you.
No, as you mentioned, digital transformation, something else that is, of course, trending and needs to be considered is cybersecurity. What is the importance of the national cybersecurity framework, when it comes to business operations and our budget?
No, it's really, really important. We have a lot of work to do on the legislation, first and foremost, and then we need to do more in terms of support for the various arms of the state that can assist with, one, proactive defense, but secondly, when something happens, to go after the bad actors. And of course, in the private sector, we have a lot of work to do as well. I mean, you all have seen the headlines over the last couple of years. And so we at AMCHAM, we're doing our part. We have an entire cybersecurity conference in November, for example, where we are targeting the private sector and of course involving the government so that we can foster platforms for collaboration, but try and get our members and the business community to do our part. Because again, it is a collaborative effort, right? Who gets hacked? It's not just the government. It is, and where are the vulnerabilities? They're both in the private, well, they're at individual level, but in the private sector and in the public sector as well. So it's very, very important. I know that the government has been working a lot with the US government on this. And hopefully we're going to see more and more activity and action in that regard.
You mentioned crime earlier, and as we talk in cybersecurity, I think it's definitely related. What recommendations do you have to strengthen the national security when it comes to preventing crime, when it comes to alleviating crime, and like you said, the perception of crime as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, a few things. They're very broad in the absence of a specific plan. So it starts with a plan, right? So what is very clearly laid out, and it doesn't have to be a plan that reveals the innards of the national security apparatus, but you could say this is our general plan. You could say these are our metrics. So this is how we'll know if the plan is working. And this should be reported on, and we've said that in our recommendations quarterly and publicly. The Commissioner of Police should have certain targets set out by the Police Service Commission, and they're reported on. And that way we know. See, because if the police service is achieving its results, and we know that, that will help us as citizens all feel better, feel safer, right?
Except, right, that when they do report and say, well, we have this coming down, but all we see in the papers is murders going up. And the police come and they say, all right, well, yes, we see murders going up. However, we see a decrease in X or a decrease in Y. Is like what the former commissioner of police who was on with us earlier said, is damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Well, that's why I'm saying that it shouldn't be left up to the news conference when they feel like presenting, right? So if you have metrics and you say, look, we've agreed that over the next year, our focus will be murders or carjackings or whatever, right? These are our priorities, and we're going to start with these two divisions because that's where the problem is most acute, or what have you. Then you can report, or whether it is seizure of guns or drugs or what have you. So that's one. The other thing is, I think the country is crying out for the convictions, arrests and convictions around white-collar crime. And let me say that as a business chamber. AMCHAM, Trinidad and Tobago, has always advocated for a very robust and aggressive push toward weeding out white-collar crime, because that facilitates all of the street crime. Okay? So we need to see some of that happening. Then we need also concurrently crime suppression and detection at the street level, because that is where we are feeling it and seeing it right now as a country. But it cannot be one as opposed to the other. They must happen together.
Do we have resources to do that?
Well, we have resources if we have the leadership and the plan.
All right, so
the headline you was talking about, that is it right there.
Now,
I stand by that.
Yeah, there's a lot that we do have to talk about as well, and really hoping that we don't run out of time. But I want to touch on the energy sector as well. How important would you say it is to have a national energy policy for growth?
Well, I think it's very important, and I think the government has been working on parts of it, right? They've been trying to secure what they see as the big thing. So how do you restructure Atlantic, for example, to incentivize more investment, because they're linked? So how do you incentivize Atlantic how did they restructure Atlantic to incentivize the investment both in the cross-border gas plays, because we talk a lot about Shell and Dragon, but there's also BP that has a cross-border play as well, and then of course in the deep, right? So that we have those who are making the investment decisions and putting out the money feel as though they have a market that they're comfortable with for the gas, and the country gets a fair return. And nobody will ever agree on what 100% on what fair is, right? So they've done that. They've done a lot of work, and I do think we cannot underscore the work, the balancing act that the government has done in dealing with both Venezuela and the US to get us to this point.
Yeah.
Okay, and that has been a significant achievement and should not be dismissed easily. Yes, it's risky. Yes, it's not at a point where it's guaranteed and gas is flowing through the pipes, but this is in fact a significant achievement. Now, I think once we get past the gas, and we have to look at the onshore and the small pools and incentivize smaller players and so on, we have to look at what's next. So green and blue hydrogen and methanol, we need to stop talking about it, and just like we did with Atlantic and moving into LNG production, we need to really find a way to get the players together, the government and those who have the deep pockets and are willing to invest in it. Proman has already signaled that they're interested as one player, for example. You already have Kenneth J and others in the hydrogen project. We need to find a way to get to what's next, right? So that we are in fact building a long-term energy industry that is also better and better for the planet as we go forward.
We don't have any time. We're out of time, but I'm going to be real boldface and take more time, right? Because I really want to
That's
ask.
your prerogative.
I want to ask in terms of, I was jumping back to crime, right? And from AMCHAM's perspective, what is the private sector's role when it comes to assisting with that part of things? Because earlier on we would have mentioned crime being a social problem and we needing not just the Ministry of National Security to solve the problem, but of course each and every one of us playing a role.
Sure.
What do you see AMCHAM and the business sector, what role do they play in that?
So because you're taking more time, permit me to answer you this way, right? So we worked with the U.S. Embassy and Amerijet, and we would have donated some bikes, e-bikes to the Tobago Police for their tourism comfort patrols and so on. We've been working with the Russell Latapy High School, the TSL Foundation, Angostura, Unipet, have just built a PAN lab there, for example. We would have worked with them for the 5 years prior to this year, and we saw some of the highest completion rates in the school. Through some of our efforts, and a number of members contributed to that. We sponsored the football team. They're not doing so well this year, but
that's all right. The investment's still there.
The teachers tell me that the students who are in football are doing better behaviorally and in school. We continue to support that. So I'm starting there to say we believe and we demonstrate that there is a role for the private sector in that. As I said, we also would have partnered with the Ministry of Education when they launched the Adopt a School program and things like that. So the private sector absolutely has a role to play. We are part of the community. Each business operates in a community or a number of communities, so we have a role to play. However, if we do not understand or there is no clarity on what is required, given paper, given footballs, giving field trips can only go so far. Okay? We need, the government needs to develop something that is more comprehensive and targeted so that we can support toward actual outcomes. And in the absence of that, companies will continue to support initiatives that they think are valuable and will try to design projects or programs that would lead to outcomes, as companies have done forever.
Yeah.
But if we're not finding a way to bring all of this together, it's going to be very, very difficult to have meaningful impact.
Mr. Tewari, I thank you so much for joining us this morning, for sharing your opinion. And we look forward to seeing what the budget reveals, and I hope we can chat about it after the budget as well.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We take a quick break and we come back with more in our morning show. We're coming back to wrap things up, so stay tuned.